everybody. My name is Rachel and I'm the Tree Traveler, and I am here in the beautiful state of Maryland, where we're going to talk with my friend Steve here. And as you may know, this channel is really to talk to folks that are involved in some way with trees and forests, and just to get to know these folks, because tree folks are the best folks, and if you don't know any, you should know them. So, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Introduce my friend Steve here, who recently retired from the United States Forest Service, but also worked for the state of Maryland as state forester. So maybe you want to just kind of like share about a little overview of what kind of stuff you were doing for the Forest Service.
Well, my pleasure. So for the last 11 years, up until this past month, I was hired on as the Director of Cooperative Forestry for the U.S. Forest Service. That is part of the mission area known as State, Private, and Tribal Forestry within the agency. And so if you want to think about mission areas, there's the National Forest System, which is mostly the public lands. There's research and development, which is obviously research and development. State, private, and tribal are mostly working with entities that are working with non-federal lands. They can still be public lands, but they would be state lands or other forms of public land, county land in some cases, municipal forests, watershed properties, those kinds of things. And by and large, the clientele we would have working with would be private landowners, various shapes and sizes. They could go from ma and pa, 5 acres and 10 acres up to 30 acres or something like that. Or it could be REITs and TIMOs, which would be more what you'd consider industrial type land holdings that are in the private sector. And then we were also working with the wood using industry. So we would do a lot of grants, and we would work with a lot of sawmills and places that were trying to stand up new markets for things like bioenergy, pellets for burning instead of coal, things for construction like cross-laminated timber. So these are new products that are coming online, and we're trying to develop markets for them so that they could be sustainable in an economic sense. And then finally, part of my portfolio was urban and community forestry. So we work very closely with the Arbor Day Foundation and many other large groups that you probably heard of, as well as groups within cities and towns and municipalities in planting trees. That could be in your backyard, it could be roadside, they could be in a park setting, because obviously urban infrastructure, green infrastructure I should say, provides a lot of resource value when it comes to lowering energy usage or providing shading and mitigating the heat island effect we see in many cities and towns. So those are the kinds of things that cooperative forestry was involved in. And when I would introduce myself as the Director of Cooperative Forestry, they would say, well, what do you mean cooperative forestry? And I would say, well, we don't really do anything on our own. We cooperate with a whole bunch of other people. So my people that I dealt with on a daily basis were people that worked for state forestry agencies, much like Rachel at one time when she was working in Pennsylvania before she made the switch to the U.S. Forest Service. So I was working with state agencies, municipalities, counties in some cases, nonprofits. And so anything that would be considered private land or non-federal public land was the things that we were involved in. And since the majority of the nation's forests are privately owned, what private owners do makes a big difference, and we want to help them make good decisions on the landscape. So,
Awesome. With some of the changes that appear to be coming down the pike currently, like what would your sales pitch be to continue to fund these things?
Well, when I was the state forester in Maryland, and to a lesser extent when I was working in Washington, D.C., and you're engaging with elected officials, I would always get the question about why are we spending the king's silver on things for private landowners, let's say. The misnomer was that if you're a landowner, you must be rich. And I would always be amazed that people had never really encountered others that are not necessarily rich. I'm familiar with landowners that are land rich and dollar poor, and so they are in need of some assistance from time to time to make good decisions or to have the right things happen on the landscape. So the way I would tell people in why this was important and why dealing with private lands, which is the bulk of the nation's forest, was important was public value flows off of those private lands. You know, clean air, clean water, plentiful forest products, a place to recreate, those kinds of things. And so while there are public values coming from private lands, there's a nexus for making public investments in those properties and with those landowners. So they'll make good decisions to make sure that the resource is sustainable going forward and continues to provide those things for people that have come to rely on them. When I was the state forester in Maryland, I used to go around the state and ask a question, especially the young people. I said, what is the most forest-dependent species on Earth, really? I used to say the United States or Maryland, but what's the most forest-dependent species? And people would raise their hand, and they various forms of birds or deer or bears, you know, something like that. And I would always say, well, that's a good guess, but the most forest-dependent species is people. It's us. And so we're doing these things for the resource, for sure, and to make sure we have a healthy ecosystem. But that's in order to provide us the many things that we've come accustomed to being able to expect from our forest lands. So
Hopefully someone's listening that's got money.
I hope so. That would be a good thing.
Yep, indeed. So you mentioned being the state forester in Maryland. There are probably a lot of people that are watching this that don't really know what that means. So maybe we can explain, what is it
Sure.
when you say you were the state forester?
So every state in the nation, including our territories, so that would be places like the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico or Guam or other places out in Oceania, American Samoa, those kind of places. There's 58 state-level forestry agencies around the country. Every state's got one and every territory's got one. And normally the head of the agency is considered the director, and or the title would be state forester. So they are the head of the organization, but they're also responsible for all things trees and forest, whether it's street trees, urban trees, whether it's nursery production, whether it's firefighting, whether it's private land management, whether it's the management of water resources for potable water supplies like reservoir systems. Those are the kinds of things. So when I was the state forester in Maryland, we had a workforce of about 140 employees at its maximum. And we had a forester and several forest rangers in every county of the state, much like other states do. And they do everything from landowner assistance to fire control to tree planting and reforestation to urban and community forestry. And so that mixed portfolio is something very attractive to me. And I made a career of it. I spent 31 and a half years working for Maryland, and 14 of those as the state forester. And I was fortunate enough to be elected by my peers around the country. I was the president of the National Association of State Foresters back in 2009 and 10. And I consider that the highlight of my professional career. I really do.
And so as you kind of made that transition from Maryland, and then, you know, you had your time at National Association of State Foresters in that leadership role, and then you took a leadership role with the Forest Service. So I don't know, maybe you can share with people your thoughts of kind of moving from like a state perspective into a national perspective, and you know, maybe some thoughts about just kind of the forest nationally.
So it was interesting. I'm a product of the East Coast, if you will. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I went to forestry school at Penn State. I spent some time in the Carolinas working as a consultant forester, and then the next 30 years in Maryland, and the next 11 years after that in Washington, D.C. So most of my personal experiences in the forest are eastern forests by and large, and so that would include the piney woods of the South, forest up around the Great Lakes, and then New England and the Northern Kingdom, so to speak. Maryland had a reputation of being America in miniature, in that southern Maryland is very much like the Carolinas. Northern and central Maryland is very much like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia in a lot of cases. Western Maryland is very much like Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, in that you have a northern forest type. So we were very, very diverse in Maryland. And even though I had benefited from having that diversity, I didn't really appreciate how diverse our nation's forests were until I became president of the National Association, and I traveled quite extensively to the other parts of the country. And so I had learned about them in school and I had visited them in a recreational sense, but to spend time talking to people that were making their living and their livelihoods in the great northern woods of, let's say, Idaho, Montana, Washington, Oregon, parts of California. Then you've got the desert Southwest and ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine and Arizona, New Mexico, southern parts of Colorado. You've got the Great Basin. You've got the plains where you know most of the trees are planted as opposed to naturally occurring. So you're talking about windbreaks and shelter belts and that kind of stuff. And then certainly you have the piney woods of the Carolinas where it's either loblolly pine, slash pine, longleaf pine, or some other variation of a southern yellow pine type. And so those landscapes are very different. Those fire sheds, if you want to call them, are very different. The watersheds are very different. People make their living in a very, very different way from one part of the country to another. People value different things. Some places are prone to fire. Other places are prone to insect and disease outbreaks. Other places are prone to conversion of land use from forested to developed in more, let's say, central Atlantic areas. Maryland is the fifth most densely populated state. New Jersey, I think, is the most populated state. So having a lot of people in the watershed and a lot of people in the wildland urban interface, let's say, is a very different landscape than the more rural parts of the West and the South and that kind of thing. So I really valued my ability and the way my career went to give me a good sense as to the opportunity and the challenges that the diversity of our landscape provides us.
And so along those lines, I'm very curious. Throughout the jobs that I've been privileged to have, I've had this struggle from time to time, or at least yearly, on how to think about the challenges that you're facing on a broader landscape, and then how do you make decisions to put resources in place A or place B or place C. Take the state of Pennsylvania, even in one state, as it is here, I know in Maryland as well, where you have, well, in Pennsylvania, you know, Philadelphia and its surroundings are very different from Erie and its surroundings. And the people are different. The challenges, the resource challenges are different. And working in our region, when I worked with the Forest Service, you know, like Washington, D.C. has very different challenges from working in, you know, Minnesota or Maine or Ohio or something. So, and you have worked in that national perspective. What are your thoughts on like how to make those hard decisions about where you spend scarce resources?
So I think one of the things that I used to do in my own head was say, where is there already a critical mass of people that want to get something done? Where are those people? Where are the opportunities? Some people coalesce around a watershed. Some people coalesce around a fire shed. Some people coalesce around a certain community, whether it's a rural community in Nebraska or a big city like Chicago or Miami or something like that. Believe it or not, there's a constituency for any one of these things. These constituencies work with their elected officials, so from time to time at either the state or the federal level, dollars show up for fire control stuff, or dollars show up for insect and disease control things, or dollars show up for improving nursery operations so that we have enough seedlings to reforest after a fire, or to make sure that we can maintain a pine resource where that's the major part of a local market, those kinds of things. So I think the first thing is to say, pick a landscape that you can make a difference in, and you can decide on what that scale is. I worked very closely with many states in the Mid-Atlantic on the Chesapeake Bay recovery. So that's one area. You can be trying to work the urban wilderness of Chicago is the city of Chicago. You've got other things like the Great Basin out west. You have things like the Northern Kingdom in upstate New York and into New England. So I would say pick a landscape that you think that you already have a cadre of people that are motivated and are knowledgeable about what those issues are and what are the things that need to happen to make improvements. So whether that's getting landowners more engaged or getting local communities more engaged or making certain investments that are synergistic. So for instance, at both the federal level and the state level, when we were giving out grants to people that were going to make things happen on the landscape, in many cases where the group was capable of doing that, we would require a match. So if we were to give you, and I'm just for the sake of this discussion, here's $250,000 to do good stuff, but you have to match it either with in-kind services or cash, another 250. So we stretched money, we made money happen. We provided seed money for others where others would say, well, these folks made an investment, we think we should make an investment too.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could figure out a landscape that seemed like you could say, here it is, and you could draw a line around that landscape, and you could say, in that landscape, we're going to move the needle on certain things, and these are the things we're going to move the needle on, and you knew who you were going to work with, and you knew what the investments were going to yield, that yield had public value associated with it. Those were the ways that we tried to steer finite resources when we wanted to get those to the ground.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Thanks. Before we move on to another subject that I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to just point out your shirts. You've got kind of your Clark Kent there, but then your Superman shirt. I thought that'd be fun for folks to see the hashtag Forest Proud. Maybe you want to make a comment about that.
So I'm proudly wearing my Forest Proud T-shirt. It's an effort that was started by industry maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. The industry was worried about others taking over the narrative about the forest product industry in North America. And there are some people that are not fans of resource extraction, they're not fans of logging and not fans of harvesting and those kinds of things. And they were taking up a lot of media space, and a lot of misinformation was getting out there. So the industry wanted to take the narrative back and to be able to tell the industry story and tell it in a way that is straightforward, truthful, factual, and with not a lot of editorializing. It just, here it is, and you can make up your own minds about whether you like it or not, but here's some good information about what the industry is doing on the landscape. That became something that was a social media presence. And eventually the Society of American Foresters took that as they would be home base for housing Forest Proud. So if you're on the internet, if you're on LinkedIn, you're on X, or you're on some of these other social media networks, and you see something that says hashtag Forest Proud, what follows will be maybe a little case study or a little story or a blurb about what industry is doing or what landowners are doing. You know, for instance, the cross-laminated timber folks are talking about using that new product of manufacturing panels to make high-rise buildings. I think the tallest timber-built building in the United States is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So there's a story around that, and there's a story around wooden bridges. There's a story around firewood banks. There's a story around clean water and salmon recovery in the Pacific Northwest. And if you see hashtag Forest Proud, you're going to learn something about the resource and about how industry is working to make the resource more sustainable and continue to provide the benefits that it does.
Awesome. And speaking of making things out of wood, we're actually sitting here on a deck that was made by Steve himself, and we are sitting in these lovely Adirondack chairs that Steve made. And so as a woodworker, one of the things that Steve's been doing in his retirement is, making some things for disadvantaged families. And I wanted to just hear about that. It's an encouraging thing that you're doing for folks. Tell us about that.
I needed to have something to do when I retired, and it needed not to be something that would cause any kind of marital strife. So I figured, okay, if I'm in my own workshop making wood products, and so I have a wood shop that's behind the camera in where we're sitting right now. So I can make bowls, and I can make wooden pens, and I can make plates, and I can make outdoor furniture. So the planter benches behind us, these Adirondack chairs, there's a number of other things I've been making. And I'm improving on my carpentry skills to the point where I don't necessarily have to make just outdoor furniture now. I can start to make indoor furniture. So whether it's a family that's in need of affordable housing, and they finally can get into an apartment or their own house, but then they don't have any furniture and they need a kitchen table or a dining room table or chairs or something like that. I'm trying to get to the point where I'm more comfortable making a higher quality product, in the sense that it could be inside and it could be used as a bed frame. It could be used for a table that the family would gather around, table and chairs, end tables, anything that could be easily made out of wood. And I'm trying to make those available to people that would need them.
Awesome. That's so cool. Thanks for doing that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So, I guess maybe we'll just finish up here by saying, I wonder if you have some thoughts for folks. I don't know, if you were to pick kind of one easy thing that folks could do to support healthy forests, what do you think that would be?
I think,
Off the top of your head.
I think off the top of my head, I think if we continue to make use of the many benefits that the forest provides us, then we'll have a reason to continue to care for them. If we start to substitute out and say, well, we shouldn't print off of printers and we shouldn't make photocopies, and we use something else, we'll go to a digital medium, or maybe we'll build our houses using aluminum studs and not wooden studs. I think the more we use the forest, the more we have a reason to continue to manage it in a way that it maintains its vigor, its health, its sustainability. And so if we enjoy clean air, clean water, we like building products that can come from this, the more we can make use of the many benefits that forests provide, there'll be a reason for us to continue to make the investment.
All right. Awesome. So wood is good.
Wood is good.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Steve. Just thanks for taking the time out and for sharing your deck and your lovely view and your insights on things. And so for those folks who do our interviews, you are now officially a member of the TreeTraveler Mutual Admiration Society. So let me give you your exclusive sticker.
Fantastic. Seems like it's a fire sale or something coming here.
Something's happening.
Yep. Hopefully nobody's hurt or anything, but in any case, thank you for this. It says, for those of you that can't read this sticker here, Mutual Admiration Society, and I guess become an official tree traveler. And so thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be giving out many more of these as your podcast or your channel continues its work. And thank you for taking the time to come visit me today.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks. And thanks everyone for watching, and hope that you've enjoyed this time. If you have any comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. We'd like to hear them. And if you would like to hear more about this, feel free to subscribe. And if you are so moved, you could support this little program by Patreon. So consider that as well. We will be giving a portion of the proceeds to the James C. Finley Center for Private Forests. So thanks everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.